Yeah, I don't see how the
Correct.
consequent
So
follows.
justifying that God is a necessary condition for knowledge. That's what you're asking, right?
Yeah, I'm asking you to support the premise. You're just saying you're giving a conditional statement, right?
Great,
Yeah,
cool.
you're giving a
So now I'm
conditional
gonna do it.
statement.
You have to stop speaking. You have to stop speaking so
Okay.
I can do it. Here we go.
Okay,
Give me
if you're
30
gonna
seconds, okay? Here we
Go
go.
ahead.
Bite your lip real hard. You can do this, man. So, logic, a standard to derive truth claims, and a knower are some simple prerequisites necessary. I can account for this and justify this because humans have an essence, a what to them, and a person of the metaphysical aspect of them, the agent,
an
that doesn't
essence.
change type
Hold
over
on.
time. Logic is a transcendental category that we have access through our nous, which is the spiritual faculty of our heart, and logic itself is a created transcendental category created by God that we can communicate with through our spiritual energies.
If that was enough.
So that's where obviously they're going to lose. That Chase is going to lose them as far as following it, right? Because they're not going to ask for an argument through the Christian paradigm. They're asking for an argument, ironically, through their own paradigm, which has no justification for arguments. So, if someone asked me, well, what's the justification for premise one, that God is a necessary precondition for why, I would say that to ask for a supporting argument is to assume there's absolute truth, right? I would start there. I would just say, okay, just clearly, just because this it would require a couple of bridges here, that to question if God is a necessary precondition for truth, to ask for an argument is to assume truth, right? So this is why the atheist who's doing cross-examination, if he doesn't have a standard for even asking for an argument, right? Because he's saying, well, we'll get to truth here. That means there is a standard for getting to truth. The moment he accepts there's a standard for getting to truth, he has to then justify how there's a standard for getting to truth. So someone might say, well, that's just shifting the burden. But the thing is, because this is a transcendental argument, the person doing cross-examination is subject to the same questioning. But what's so frustrating here is that J. Mike, along with many atheists, will accept relativism. And then they'll use relativism to cross-examine another worldview that assumes God, right? Now, I would have gone to logic, perhaps. I would say, instead of knowledge, right? God is the necessary precondition for knowledge, right? Because knowledge assumes all these other things that Chase listed: a knower, a being, someone with intent, someone who can argue, laws of logic. That's why I shift to truth, because from their view, they're assuming truth, but they're not going to equate truth and God right away, or ever, perhaps, these people. But truth is something they can't avoid. They can't avoid. If I say God is necessary for truth, which is essentially the same argument. If they said, support your claim that God is necessary for truth, I would use truth is absolute and conceptual. Here's my supporting argument for God is necessary for truth. Truth is absolute and conceptual. Concepts require minds. Humans cannot create absolute concepts. Absolute concepts require absolute mind. Now, I don't think J. Mike, unless he goes back to relativism, which is silly and self-refuting anyway, he couldn't counter any of those premises. And that's what these people do. You'll give a premise, and then they'll say, give me an argument for that premise. And then you give an argument for that premise, and then they eternally go, well, give me an argument for that premise inside the supporting argument for the initial premise. And what they do is they try to exhaust you by just arbitrarily rejecting certain premises and asking you to offer more arguments for these supporting premises. It's like an endless cycle. What is an absolute concept? Well, from their view, it's an absolute concept. I wouldn't say truth from my view is an absolute concept. I would say truth is a being. But from their view, they have to accept truth as an absolute concept. was an absolute concept, that it can't be negated, can't be challenged without assuming it. Like, so it'd be a contradiction to challenge it, because it's like this: saying truth is absolute as a state, Hank, saying truth isn't absolute is a contradiction. So the law of identity is an absolute concept. You can't challenge the law of identity without assuming it. It's impossible. You can't change any of it, right? There are things that are true that you can't change. From their view, truth is conceptual, and it has to be absolute, because arguing otherwise would prove it to be absolute. So, oh yeah, from their view, axiomatically, yeah. So that's why you can support the argument. You just have to rephrase the first premise, because they're just not going to accept the term God, the meaning of God, from the perspective of knowledge, because in their epistemic view, knowledge is just a justified true belief from their experience. That's it. Just an experience of knowing something, a mental state, whatever they say, right? So that's why knowledge is a little ambiguous. And truth, they can't wiggle out of truth, because you can argue you have knowledge of something completely false. You can just argue, I have knowledge of an orange or whatever. I have knowledge of this. Can I have knowledge without God? Well, then you're getting into like this argument of like, well, how is it you came to the knowledge of this? And you point to all these things. Whereas truth, whether you have knowledge of something, the question of whether truth is accessible, whether your knowledge is accurate, if it's true, if it reflects truth, then they have to accept truth exists. Well, if truth exists, they'd have to say truth don't real. So